This is a press conference with the International Crisis Group. This is essentially an NGO that works to prevent mass atrocities around the world. And it's a very warm welcome to Hans Hubierke, who is the Crisis Group's senior analyst for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He's based in Nairobi, so we're very happy to have him in New York with us today. And Ashish Pradhan. Ashish is the ICG's senior UN analyst. So I'm going to throw it over to them for opening statements. And the topic is elections in the DRC. Over to you.
Thank you for having me. I'll be very brief, and I welcome your questions, of course, afterwards. I will just give you a basic rundown, actually, of my recent field visits in Kinshasa and in Addis Ababa, and what it means, where we're going. We are soon going to publish a report on DRC. I hope it will be next week. So you will all get this. And of course, afterwards as well, I'm always available. My card will be available for you for any questions or comments or remarks, what have you. So without further ado, Kinshasa is quite different today than it was a few months ago. And I don't want to be on record as an optimist, certainly not. It's impossible on Congo. But to a certain degree, we are closer to a potential election than we have ever been in the past years. You may have all seen that almost on a daily basis, you see political parties in Congo forming new alliances, talking to each other, then falling out, creating breakoffs and what have you. So there's quite a lot of political activity going on today that we did not see for quite some time. And that in itself is a positive element. Now, that positive element being said, of course, there's quite a lot of challenges that remain. Although we have technical progress on the preparation of elections, there's a voter list, there's an electoral law, the voter list, let's say, is being cleaned, there is an electoral law, there is an electoral calendar, which we have been waiting for a long time. All these things are known, but the political climate, of course, for elections is not yet there. So the major challenge for the international community will be to ameliorate the conditions to have elections, and that will basically mean creating a climate of confidence and allowing political parties to engage operationally, to mobilize, to bring people together, and to actively engage. Now, why does this not happen? Of course, to a large degree, because President Kabila does not want to lose power. He wants to remain in control, and the preparations we see thus far for elections are elections that they want to win, that they can't lose. And so they are setting the stage for an electoral campaign that they will win, unless, of course, the opposition will be able to mobilize and to get together. What is driving this force or this progress today? That is mostly, I would say, pressure by the international community, in particular by the African Union and the sub-region, SADC. So yeah, let's keep it at this as an introductory statement, and I welcome all your questions. Thank you.
And I can go in a little bit just from the New York perspective. DRC is one of the conflicts we track very closely from here. And just to add to what Hans said, I think we know in our past reporting, one of our focuses has been how can there be an effort to align some of the positions of the regional actors, SADC, Angola, South Africa, Tanzania to an extent, with some of the broader international community. The voices that you hear quite strongly at the Security Council. There was the big area formula meeting on the DRC elections just a couple of weeks ago here, and there we saw, it was intriguing to the sense that there was a bit of commonality in some positions taken about the need for elections, the need for openness of democratic space, all the elements that Hans touched on. But there was also some differences that emerged. There seems to be some key member states that are prioritizing some of the technical aspects of electoral preparations, as opposed to some of these more softer sort of political openings that are required. And that can create some level of discord, in terms of alignment of positions. If one side is focusing just on deadlines and minutiae related to the electoral preparations, another side is focusing on opening of democratic space. it might not necessarily be to the benefit of the electoral process at the end. So trying to align and figuring out how we can better sort of join up these approaches has been a big focus for us. Then there's the element of the UN, the role of the UN, especially of MONUSCO in the context of this electoral process. We see the UN being in a potentially tricky situation where it could be asked to either, in the end, support what is a very flawed electoral process, or if it doesn't support it, then it's going to be obviously blamed by the government for more delays and for elections not taking place. So we see the Secretariat being in a potentially precarious situation. What we've been trying to impress, including with this upcoming report, is that let's try to see how we can align positions before it gets to that point, before it gets to the place where the UN has to make these very difficult decisions. Is try to think through what some of these challenges are. So that's I'll leave it at that. And again, happy to answer any questions.
All right, so I'll start with a couple of questions. I mean, they just had a very big meeting this morning on the humanitarian situation in the DRC. In the council, you hear numbers like 13 million people are in need of humanitarian aid in 2018, 4.5 million IDPs. To what extent is the ongoing conflict and instability in some parts of the country having a bearing on preparations for these elections? What sort of turnout do you expect at an election when people are, to this day, running from their homes? So that one's for you, Hans. And then for you, Ashish, you talk about the role of regional groups. If you look at IGAD vis-a-vis South Sudan or Burundi, what are your real expectations of SADC and big countries in SADC like South Africa? What would you like to see them do in the weeks ahead?
Well, thanks for the question. Yes, the humanitarian situation is absolutely dire, and all indications thus far indicate a worsening of that situation. I think one of the elements that could calm things a little bit down is if at a lower level, because what I told you about progress, it's of course very much Kinshasa based. It's a Kinshasa circus amongst political leaders to a certain degree. It doesn't go down to the provinces, not even the major provincial capitals. So the humanitarian crisis and a lot of the conflicts seem to be driven by insecurity, uncertainty about where the country is going. And as long as we do not get a level of certainty that reaches the population, it will continue to drive local conflict. And in our reading, the IDPs, but in particular I would say the refugee flows and the uncertainty and insecurity it brings at the regional level is one of the elements that pushed this progress. It is one of the driving factors that mobilized the region. We saw Angola reacting on the Kasai crisis. We also see that Uganda is very concerned about what's happening at its border. And so the whole situation of a country with 9 neighbors that is going through an increasingly insecure and uncertain tendency is what is driving the AU and the SADC to react. And that's, I think, a good opening to Ashish as well.
Thanks, Hans. Yeah, I mean, just to, and Hans has just been to Addis as well, so I'd certainly defer to his thoughts on the regional element. But in terms of the key positions, especially within SADC, and looking at South Africa, and already we see a high level of expectation about what Ramaphosa will bring in terms of regional perspectives, whether there will be more constructive engagement. And Hans and I were just talking about this prior to this meeting, this fact that even if Ramaphosa doesn't take a very proactive approach, if it's something, even if it's sort of passive compared to what we saw from Zuma, maybe that'll be a net benefit, that at least there won't be that same sort of buddy-buddy type of relationship with Kabila. But more broadly, and again trying to link it to the UN, we've been looking at how and what are some of the mechanisms through which the SADC, ICJLR, the Security Council, the AU, all of them can be at least on the same page and even in the same room. And to that extent, there was last September during the GA, the establishment of the group of electoral experts. It hasn't really gotten off the ground so much. There's differing views in terms of how much it can actually do, but we're saying that in our past reporting and in our upcoming report, one of the ideas we're trying to explore is whether this can be a mechanism that can be a sort of a conduit where different energies can be brought in from the different sides, and at the very least, trying to coalesce some common position. So we've seen a good step from SADC with the appointment of their envoy for the DRC, but the level of engagement that Congolese have given hasn't been quite there. So maybe with the appointment of that envoy, maybe with this electoral expert team being more more beefed up, that can be something that we see from the region that also aligns with the broader international community.
If I can add onto this, I think it's one of the most important developments in the last 6 months. We have seen increased coherence in the international response, and we have seen the African Union, together with the UN and SADC at the sub-regional level, taking a leadership role. The AU's role, I think, at this point is absolutely crucial. The AU has a liaison office in Kinshasa that is working very hard and working very well. It is understaffed, but if you look at the staffing and the output, it is incredible. And SADC has more difficulty, and I think it indeed shows, as she says, that there is, on the level of the Congolese government, still this attempt to try to maintain the initiative and to perhaps even play the region against each other. But the recent publication of a particular letter by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Botswana, which was very clear, was seen by most as Botswana at that time speaking out loud what others were thinking privately. And the information we get from the meetings of the regional heads of state with Kabila are that they all message very clearly that it's the recreation period is over, to quote Kabila in 2006, and it's time to move forward. The region is tired.
Well, Botswana is increasingly becoming very outspoken on issues and sort of breaking ranks with regional members, which is refreshing. Maggie, from the Voice of America.
Thanks. Thank you. Just wanted to get your take on the UN report that came out today. The UN said that the government had used unlawful, unjustified, and disproportionate force on anti-government protesters who were protesting about the elections. Can I get your reaction on that?
Well, the UN is joined in this actually by the Congolese government itself. If you look at the report that was published by the Kinshasa government on the 10th of March, which looked into the violence on the 31st of December and the 21st of January, the report itself was very critical for the way the Congolese security forces handled that protest. By the way, it's a very interesting report, and it's something we should engage on with the Congolese government, because this comes from their side. Of course, it has been worked upon by the DRC with the African Union. And it clearly calls for the opening of political space, the lifting of the ban on public protest, and the limitation of the use of troops in quelling peaceful protest. So yeah, the UN report underscores what is known, and it is important that the international community pressures the DRC, but also engages on the recommendations of the Congolese government's own report.
Sia?
Sia Pak from Scan News. I always hear people come and complain about the situations. If there is one thing one of you can change in Congo, in order to make the situation better, what it is?
Kabila?
No, and that's a problem, I would say. Even we have a tendency to personalize these issues, whereas our friend Kabila is only the top of an iceberg. In a way, what we should change is expectations. These elections are not even about democracy anymore. These are about bringing stability to a region that absolutely needs it. So managing expectations and actually getting our heads together and bring some real action to the table. And I think, although it is silent for the moment, it is what the AU is doing. So we are moving in the right direction. But we have to get a way of simplifying the issue. We have to get a way of, this is an issue about a person, this is an issue of a dictator, this is an issue of one individual. No, this is a very structural problem of governance in a country that has gone off the rails since 2006, of course before as well, but 2006 was a moment of hope, and it was very badly managed. So this in a way is also an expected crisis that the international community was very late and slow to recognize and to try to deal with. So managing expectations.
And
So
if
I
I
would
could
say.
just add to that, I mean, exactly on this point, one of the difficult things here in New York that we hear from Security Council members has been, for a while, and not so much recently, but certainly throughout the past sort of year and a half, is an over-focus on the need to get Kabila out. So there's a sense that if we get Kabila to step down, That's the bottom line. That's what we need. But there's an inability to look beyond that. And I think what that risks is, like Hans said, sort of personalizing it. But there's also, you narrow yourself off from other scenarios that won't be helpful to democracy. And one of the things we're trying to say with this elections report that we have coming up is, we don't want to get to the point where you are now getting closer to elections after having delays for a couple of years. But there's now an election that's in the works that won't be necessarily free or necessarily fair, won't be credible. So is that good enough? And this question of what is a good enough election process is something that we've had varying responses from key Security Council members. Some say, they just want some measures to be met. Others want a higher standard to be met. It speaks to the fact that when you really focus in on just one person, one element, you can miss some of the other key angles. And so that's why I would say it's not necessarily doesn't come down to just one thing, especially in this case, not just one person.
Marie Lemont?
Kind of answer my question, but a follow-up to my colleague. Don't you fear a kind of Russian way of doing politics in DRC with Kabila trying to hold the powers with having actually a president being on his side? And the second question is regarding the political process. We heard a lot about those voting machine that's worrying a lot the diplomats here. What's the sense of you got on the...
Those are the electronic ones, right?
Yeah.
Let's start with the voting machine. Indeed, it is quite a controversial thing. And when you speak to African diplomats in Kinshasa, they all smirk a little bit and they say, well, we would never have thought about that in our own countries. And these are countries that are mostly smaller and, let's say, have better infrastructure than DRC. So there certainly are a number of questions about the needs and the reasons why they do this. And the concerns, of course, there are three main issues. There's technical concerns, there's political concerns, and there's a financial concern. The voting machine could be more inspired by the size of the contract and the money involved than about the actual political use of it, as some seem to imply. Now, that being said, I think we should step away a bit from focusing on these smaller issues. Congolese actors, the opposition refuses the machine, but that is mostly since a number of international actors have come out clearly against it. The Congolese Catholic Church asked very clearly for a independent national and independent and international audit of the machine. I think that's something we need to press for. And of course, it is an issue we should have to clarity on as soon as possible. As long as this lingers on, it might contribute to a potential future delay. In itself, the machine is not more fraud sensitive, I have been told in Kinshasa by different actors, than the paper vote. And if you look at 2011, we see very clearly that the use of the ballot, the traditional paper ballot, is no guarantee at all against fraud. So if it's fraud we want to refuse or we want to get away of, any technical instrument can be used or disused for that instrument. I am personally more concerned about the financial impact of it. Now, talking to the CENI on this specific issue, I have a feeling that there is some leniency, and that there are some concerns that not all the machines will be produced in time, and that the machine could be used in a number of areas instead of the whole country. And that might be an interesting compromise situation. But we should get clarity on the machine as soon as possible. And now I have replied to that, and I have completely forgotten your first question.
Putin Medvedev.
Putin Medvedev. Yes, of course. I think if Kabila has one dream, because I think he understands that he has to leave the seat of power, the throne to a degree, but he doesn't want to lose power. He will have to do it through the kind of Putin-Medvedev scenario. And of course, I think the recent cover of Jeune Afrique also shows already a number of potential dauphins. Everybody, if you go to Kinshasa, you talk to whomever in the political sphere, they will all give you a few names. We will see who Kabila will choose. It is a moment of tension, clearly, also within the majority. And so Yeah, it's uncertain times, and if when we look at Angola, where President Dos Santos had hoped, at least that's what we presume, that his successor would maintain his interests. For Kabila, there's a few lessons in there, I guess, but that's a dangerous lesson as well. So we will have to see. In any case, whomever comes in will have to deal with a number of structures that have been built around the person. If you try to understand the Kabila system, he is like a capstone holding a number of interests in balance. The moment that force is removed, you will have a reconfiguration, and that reconfiguration can be very dangerous. That's one of the reasons I said we don't have to just focus on the person. It is a whole system that has been put in place in the last 15 to 20 years, and that has taken over the state to a certain degree and controls the state mostly through parallel mechanisms, not through the formal mechanisms that we know. And if we will have any meaningful change in Congo, then in the future we will have to have a dismantling, and it's probably going to have to be gradually, or it will happen with a very dangerous shock of that parallel system of government. Again, that's why we have to manage to a certain degree our expectations. These are dangerous forces and interests to work with, and to build a democracy in DRC will take years and years and years, and will have a lot of setbacks in the future as well. But I'm sure it will happen. If you talk to the Congolese, that's what they want. That's what they need.
So when you talk about this parallel system of government, what do you mean exactly? Can you just sort of expand on that?
Well, you have a number of structures that are indeed partially state structures, but that are very informally linked to the president, to the security forces. They do not necessarily follow the traditional lines of reporting. You have the economic system, where you clearly have lines from different companies, societies, to the president and the interests around him, and that has been documented by a number of international investigations. You have the whole, let's say, family empire, regionally dominated empire of the Kabila group that transcends all these spheres. So you have these three more or less interacting networks of about, I try to map them a little bit, of about 60 to 80 people. But these are people that control the reins of the state.
Please.
I was in the DRC 2 weeks ago, but in the eastern part in Bukavu, and the impression that you get from there is that elections are not months away, but years away. And I came away with a pessimistic impression. I'm seeing it from there. There will not be elections next year, this year. But I wanted to ask you something more specific. What is, in your opinion, the role of the Catholic Church, and who is taking the initiative from the point of view of the Catholic Church? Is it a local cardinal, or is it Rome, or is it both?
No, I get your feeling from Bukavu. It's also what I said initially. What you see now in terms of preparations, what you see now in terms of movement, is very Kinshasa-based. It's not to be seen in Goma. It's not to be seen in Bukavu. It's not to be seen in Lubumbashi. But that is in itself not the biggest problem. It will have to go down there, but people have been enrolled. The infrastructure to a certain degree is ready, although if you look at CENI offices, of course, these look not like offices that are ready to organize an election, but that was also the case in previous elections. It will come from Kinshasa. It will be top-down, and there are no guarantees, of course, but we are closer to it than we were a year ago. There are more signs that we will go there than a year ago. The regional pressure is there. The international pressure is there. And a number of steps have been taken. They are reversible. In a way, I got messages this morning that even the electoral law that was passed by the majority might now again become doubtful, or the majority might want to review some of the issues it has pushed for, such as the electoral threshold, because it's no longer certain that it will work in its favor in the election. So certainly there are challenges, and certainly the people in the provinces need to see something real and something concrete. But as I said earlier, there is more now than there was, and the pressure seems to be quite effective. But again, for the moment, on Kinshasa. The Catholic Church has been a key actor for quite a while, but it also has been an actor that has been very strong in opposition for quite a while, limiting to a degree its influence. I mean, it's not fully accepted as a mediating voice, certainly not by the regime or by groups around it. And for a while, the Church has tried to balance and stay away from becoming a voice of opposition. And actually, when you look at the latest statements by the Church, you will see that it clearly states that it wants to have this middle ground. The advantage of the Church's decision-making process is that it is not a monolithical organ. It is composed of different regional and other interests, and so whatever comes out of the SENCO, the Episcopal Conference in Congo, is a more concrete consensus than any other statement you will find in the country, and you will find these statements relatively. But trying to maintain a relative middle ground, but of course they cannot deny the reality, and the reality is that agreements such as the Saint-Sylvester Agreement have been implemented one-sidedly. When you look at its latest statements on the electoral process, you will find that the Church is, despite its frustrations on the implementation of the Saint-Sylvester Agreement, still looking forward, still looking ahead, still trying to be a constructive actor. And it has been joined recently by a number of other churches, which is a good sign, especially the changes in the Protestant churches, the Église du Christ au Congo, that were quite close to Kabila until last year, and have now taken a more critical stance. And one of the things that would be important and would help, in a way, the Catholic Church and civil society at large, would be for the churches, not only the Catholic, but also the Protestants, the Muslim community, and several other churches in Congo to come together and produce a joint statement on the elections and on the political process. I understood from talks with the different churches that they would be open for such steps, and I think that's an important thing for them to do. Now, who drives it? I wouldn't say it's Vatican-driven. I think it's quite locally driven. The priests that you meet are, of course, under pressure of their parishioners, for social reasons, and of course the political frustration. But mostly, I would say, for social reasons. The economy has been very bad, for example, these last years, and so the Church, as a conduit of social frustration, has reacted to pressure of its parish priests. But that being said, as I just said on the SENCO, there is no clear consensus in the SENCO on the need for the Church to play a political role, for example. And that is very clearly demonstrated in the positions it takes, which, in my view, makes it stronger, because it's not an organization that has a habit of shouting. It's an organization that has a habit of speaking in a concise voice.
All right, so if there are no more questions, I'll ask one more before we let you go. What's your sense of the electoral observer missions, particularly from Africa, the AU, SADC, and what role they will play? They seem to have sort of grown into the tag that they tend to rubber stamp elections that are perhaps not as free or credible as one might hope. What's your sense of the role that these, SADC and the AU can play in that regard?
Well, as they are doing now, those not observer missions, but as the organizations are now crucial for any progress in Congo, observation missions from the AU and SADC will be important. But the opposition, and that's an important point, the opposition does not have a lot of confidence in them. We indeed should not forget in 2011, when Western countries, the EU and others were quite critical about the electoral process, the SADC and South Africa in particular rubber-stamped it immediately. So there is a legacy, but I do think that at the regional level a page has been turned. The opposition does not have the confidence, and that's it, right? And that's why it's important that the rest of the international community and the UN is also very engaged in this process. So I would say at this point the collaboration UN and AU provides a sphere of confidence for both majority and the opposition to find progress on these elections.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Hans, Ashish, and Karim. Good luck to the DRC.
Thank you.
I think we solved all the problems.